Okay, we're continuing with the quotes here in alphabetical order. This is Sidney Brenner. He lived from 1927 to 2019. He was a biologist from South Africa. He won the Nobel Prize in 2002 for physiology and medicine. He actually was friends with Watson and Crick. Did some work in England. And here's somebody writing about him, after he died. He said, like Feynman, Brenner is witty and has won a Nobel Prize. But most important for a legend, Brenner, like Feynman, has this wonderful superiority complex, which results in irreverence, disdain for authority, and allergy to pomposity. This is what young scientists love. Yeah, the guy was funny with a sense of humor. And, smart guys, they know that a lot of the conventional accepted stuff is bogus, okay? Okay, so here's some quotes by Sidney Brenner. He says, theories are like a mistress. One should never fall in love with them, and they should be discarded when the pleasure they provide is over. Have you ever tried neuro-oxing your papers? It's very easy and cheap. You hold the page in front of your eye, and you let it go through there into your brain. It's much better than Xeroxing. Living most of the time in a world created mostly in one's head does not make for an easy passage in the real world. All right, so now here's a good one about the benefit of young people in science. He says, a lot of things that have been accomplished in science have been accomplished on the basis of ignorance, in the sense that you import into the science people from the outside. Because once you have an established science, it has got its high priests, the guys who know everything, what will work and what won't. And they don't want to be bothered. So you have to have a challenge. And the great thing is that the young people are ignorant, and we should catch them before they turn into the priesthood. So I think that science should have a much more daring approach. Yeah, young guys willing to go for it. All right, the old guys say, oh no, you can't do that, you can't do that. All right, so here's a good one from Sidney Brenner. He says, nowadays, even God would not be able to get a grant because somebody on the committee would say, oh, those were very interesting experiments like creating the universe, but they were never repeated. And then someone else would say, yes, and he did it a long time ago. What has he done recently? And then a third would say, to top it all off, he published in an unrefereed journal called the Bible. So it's true. Unless you sort of do what the committee wants, you can't get published these days. And you can't get published in most journals if you contradict big business. If you say a drug is bad, that won't get published, or you'll get in trouble for doing that. If you say a surgical device is bad, they don't want to publish that. If you say there's a better way to treat than a drug or a surgery, they don't want to put that in the journal. And that's why science has become bogus. Okay, next quote by Sidney Brenner. There is a crisis developing in biology in that completely unstructured information does not enhance understanding. We need a framework to put all this knowledge and data into. This is a big problem for biology. Progress in science depends on new techniques, new discoveries, and new ideas, probably in that order. Innovation comes only from an assault on the unknown. I think one of the things about creativity is not to be afraid of saying the wrong thing. Okay, anyways, what I wanted to get at with that thing about unstructured information is not helpful. What he means by that is if you have a whole bunch of random facts, you can't do anything with it. You need to put them in the context of a theory to make sense out of something. And whether they're right or wrong, you can figure that out later, but you have to be driving toward the theory. And the best thing is when you've got competing theories and you try to see which one is correct or can they all be reconciled. Okay, so Sidney Brenner continues. As we predicted at the beginning of the Human Genome Project, getting the sequence will be the easy part because only technical issues were involved. The hard part will be finding out what it means because this poses intellectual problems of how to understand the participation of the genes in the functions of living cells. And a big thing about the Human Genome Project is there were a lot of surprises with it. They predicted it would make cancer understandable, but it did the opposite. What it showed is that the somatic mutation theory, the SMT, really doesn't work. Very seldom does it work. Sometimes it does, but not too often. And that the MTC, the metabolic theory of cancer, was much better because they couldn't find a standardized pattern of mutations for most cancers, which they were expecting to find. And what that meant is it seemed almost random that cancer was not primarily a problem of mutation. And, it's not just one gene change, like, scratching an audio CD with a paper clip is like one mutation. It was more like, hundreds of things changed and a whole different way of life. A metabolic change from aerobic to primarily anaerobic metabolism, for example. And then going with that idea of the unstructured information, here's a quote by Lawrence Pilgram. The immense mass of uncollated and non-integrated data does not permit understanding of biological mechanisms of function. The crux of the problem seems to be that we have developed a current generation of scientists with a men set on automation who use this generation of data as a substitute for thinking. What is clearly needed is the development of cogent and coherent theories that can be used to organize and test the relevance of all this unstructured data. What he's basically saying is the same thing as Sidney Brenner. You need a theory to make sense out of all the data. Otherwise, you don't know one fact from another. And then here's a quote that goes with that from Thomas Kuhn, who wrote the book about scientific paradigms and how they change. He said, in the absence of a paradigm or some candidate for a paradigm, all facts that could possibly pertain to the development of a given science are likely to be seen as equally relevant. Yeah, you need something that puts them in perspective. So anyways, that was some quotes from Sidney Brenner. My favorite one was about even God wouldn't be able to get a grant by the modern standards nowadays. Okay, hope you found that helpful.